Dhumuntarao.
Dhumuntarao. It's okay, no worries.
Oh, so we're going to be using
that one. Yeah, that one. Is that pointed by the way?
Yes, there is. That's the one. Okay, so let me just turn the stop.
How's everyone doing?
So Aditya is going to be telling us, he's coming from University of Minnesota, and he's going to be telling us about gravitational instabilities using 4 back strings negatives.
Yeah, before that, first off, thanks for sticking around and got off a hour. I'd also like to thank APS, but no, last time I had coffee was like 8 hours ago, so I'm definitely at my lowest energy level. But no, this is some conversation that I started with Rafid in prehistoric times in 2019 BC before COVID. And it's a nice story. So we're going to end up talking about a classical problem in this session on semi-classical and quantum black holes. So yeah, this is a story about gravitational instabilities of uniform black strings in AdS. So as some of you may know, pure gravity in d equals 4 and higher admits various black hole configurations. You can have, on the bottom, it shows a simple spherically symmetric black hole solution, or you can have a black string solution d equals 4, for example, with ADS asymptotics, or in higher dimensions as well. And this is a violation of Hawking's theorem on black hole topology. You usually would have expected spherical geometries only to persist in higher dimensions, and yet there are different kinds. Now, back in 1993, before I was born, by the way, Gregory and UofM asked a simple question, which is, which of these black hole configurations are stable? If you have several of them, some of them should be unstable. There should be a preferable state. And the semi-classical argument for why I think I'm actually in this session is probably because they argued that the dominant entropy configuration should win out. Now, this comes with a caveat. You cannot compare the entropy contribution from a black string unless you compactify it against the black hole, because the black string has infinite energy along the infinite entropy along the string length direction. But if you do this compactification, you essentially end up with some entropy estimates, and you can see that for some critical value of m, there should be, or LZ, the length of the extra dimension, there should be some transition. But this is a semi-classical argument, and we can ask, okay, well, what is the classical argument? Now, in general, you have two types of spacetimes, vacuum spacetime or non-vacuum spacetime. And the instability of the black string or the black hole can be characterized essentially by scalar operator spectra on both of those types of spacetimes. So in general, for example, for a vacuum spacetime, we can look at tachyonic modes of the Dirichlet-Horowitz operator. I will show you how the operator looks like. It is not illuminating. Or for a non-vacuum spacetime, you can look at tachyonic modes inside the Laplace-Beltrami operator, or this is the Klein-Gordon operator if you're familiar with that. And essentially, if you find such a tachyonic mode, you're guaranteed more or less an instability. Now, the canonical examples of black strings considered by Gregory and UofM back in 1993, and also in 1994 for a charge invariant, showed that the spectrums of these scalar operators seem to be correlated. The spectrum of the Laplace-Beltrami operator seemed to appear in the Dirichlet-Horowitz and so on. And Gupta and Mitra in 2000 famously even showed that you can only consider matter perturbations and not the metric perturbations and still be able to find instabilities. So both papers found instabilities in the matter sector, and it's somewhat of a common lore that tachyonic modes in the matter sector are also necessary and sufficient for a black string instability. So now we fast forward to 2019. Back in 2019, Cisterna and some friends found a simple set of ADS black string solutions with a scalar field, just a minimally coupled scalar field, masses, where the scalar field fluctuations satisfy the Klein-Gordon equation in vacuum. Now, if you were to compactify the additional direction, like with some KK compactification, then you would find the second equation that's written in between the equalities. I don't know if you can see that. The stability argument that they gave was they did some detailed analysis on the operator spectrum on the scalar part, on the matter part, and they found no tachyonic modes. So, and some further evidence that some technology that we used in our paper, which is at PRD, published in January of this year, we use the BF bound to show that once you perform the KT compactification, the mass is obviously positive, and it saturates the BF bound, so there shouldn't be an instability. So we confirmed their results using new technology, newer, I suppose. So yeah, they conjectured that no tachyonic modes were found in the spectrum of this operator for matter perturbations only, and so these new black string solutions should be stable, just classically stable, like the most rigorous version of classical stability. But that kind of contradicts a lot of evidence to the contrary. Starting actually with 2000. In 2000, Gregory also showed that non-uniform, so these are slightly different, they're non-uniform or asymptotically flat locally ADS black strings, they are unstable. Gubser and Mitra also showed in 2000 something very similar to the one which I will touch upon in a second, about something called correlated stability. And they also showed that these black rings were unstable. And then there's several others that essentially improved upon these results or elaborated in different ways. But it can be summarized in this tension. There's some tension here. There's some non-uniform AdS black strings, and they're unstable. And then there's a uniform Schwarzschild black string, and it is also unstable. And then somehow by adding this scalar field, it's supposedly stabilized. Now it's a puzzle. It seems like there's some small sector in the phase space of matter contributions to gravity where you can perhaps have these stabilized black strings. And I found that pretty suspicious. So there's some concrete questions you can ask, which is it possible for GL instability to persist in the tensor fluctuations, even if it is not there in the matter fluctuations? And in D equals 4, AdS asymptotics guarantee that BTC3 strings should be thermodynamically stable. Now these are also related to classical stability by the correlated stability conjecture, which I haven't gotten to. I'll tell you about that later. So it's also interesting to ask, is this actually truly classically stable in 4 dimensions, where we supposedly live, not with APS asymptotics? And then the last question is, how do these uniform black strings somehow evade the assumptions made by the prior authors and the improvements made since 1993? And just to give you the result, like ahead of time, we argue essentially that tachyonic modes in the scalar operator spectrum for matter perturbations are only sufficient to guarantee classical instability. You need something else. You need the full metric perturbations. And the protocol is rather simple. I mean, I'm literally just reproducing all of the stuff that Gregory and UofM did back in 1993. This is like old technology. You just perturb your background fields around your classical solution. You expect your equations of motion to be satisfied to order epsilon. And yeah, you impose some gauge constraints, isometries, boundary conditions, initial data on Scribe Plus. You have some ansatz where essentially you perturb along the black hole direction, you perturb along the flat direction, and then you have a mixture perturbations. And this is in its full glory the Lichner-Evers operator. So our goal was to just study this thing and compare it against the spectrum of the Laplace spectrometry operator. And so now moving into our results, the background UBS metric essentially looks like this. It's just directly a vibration of ADS and then a flat direction. And there are some isometries that allow us to reduce the black hole perturbations to this form. It's not illuminating, I know. And according to Gregory and Cole, as long as you have a stable perturbation, you can turn it off. So we turned off the matter perturbations. And then the gauge constraints essentially gave us the following, that the mixture terms are just 0. Sorry, the tensor modes along the off-diagonal section is 0. And then we compactified the z direction because we need to, find it, like do this on the computer. So the results are rather striking. On the left-hand side is Gregory and UofM's original paper, and they check in various dimensions. D equals, well, in this case it says D equals 4, but they mean space-time dimension is 1 dimension lower, 1 dimension higher. So this is just a spatial dimension. So they check space-time dimension 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then we did the same thing, but in this case, our D actually starts at 5, like reasonably. And then we found a similar behavior, except for there's a shift in the 0, which I can talk about in a second. And this is essentially strong numerical evidence for classical instabilities. And these are just quadratic fits. They're not there to illustrate. They're just there to illustrate a trend. Now that we have like classical instability, at least evidence of it, we should look for other things, specifically correlated instability. So now coming back to what Quarks2Cosmos actually did in 2000, they showed that if you have your microcanonical entropy for your black hole, which some of the speakers here have already talked about the entropy of a black hole, so I don't have to really talk about that. If you take the Hessian of the microcanonical entropy and it has a positive eigenvalue, that's a rather straightforward linear calculation, then the black strings are actually unstable. Now the correlated stability is no longer a conjecture, it was proven by Hollins and Wall. And another way to talk about it is to talk about the corollary, which is you just do the convex hull of the entropy and then you replace the entropy with the mass, and you can essentially make the same argument. So a direct computation results in showing that in any dimension greater than 4, there is in fact unstable black strings, and in 4 dimensions, it turns out that these black strings are stable. So we have essentially proved, both using classical arguments and also semi-classical arguments, that the Cisterna paper was a little too quick. Yeah, so that's one check, and then the second check is the weak cosmic censorship check, and this one I'll just list through really quickly. I would like to thank Jorge Santos for this check particularly. We just needed to show if weak cosmic censorship is violated, and it's not enough to find a Bernoulli-Lefram instability. We need to do more than that. We have to find a non-uniform black hole black string solution, and we did. The black string solution that we considered was an ADS black funnel. And if you compare the uniform black string, which is just a cylinder, and then the black funnel, which looks like this trumpet shape, you can compute the entropy, and essentially you will find that the entropy of the uniform black string is greater than the entropy of a black funnel in a particular parameter regime, so it will in fact tunnel to a black hole, not some non-uniform solution instead. Okay, so that brings me to our conclusions and our conjectures. So from a numerical and analytic study, we found that black string spacetimes have matter. It's nice if you have your tachyonic modes in the matter sector, but you really need it in the gravitational sector. Correlated stability is not violated. Hooray! We can still use it. And we conjecture that intermediate uniform black strings in fact dominate over non-uniform black string solutions entropically, provided they are exact black funnels. And there's some general directions that I'm happy to talk about. Thank you for your time. Good night, everyone.